Hi, welcome back to the next episode of East India Marketing Company. Again, Jena has ditched me, as you can see, and in place of Jena, I have a very special guest, someone who, in fact, was with Jena in his B school from IMT again, and we'll talk about all of that. So, Nikhil, how have you been?
I've been good. Good to see you, Alekia. काफी सालों के बाद, and Jana missed the opportunity to have this reunion with the three of us, but I'm sure we'll get back there. But good to see you.
Yeah,
It's been a long time.
it's been a long time, and the last time I remember, Nikhil had a very different accent that I remember what I'm hearing here. So,
अच्छा
clearly,
already
yeah,
सुनने में लग रहा है क्या? हाँ मेरे को पता नहीं
yes.
चलता ना अपना because I'm surrounded too much now.
Correct,
चलो.
correct, correct. Awesome. So for our viewers, quickly, Nikhil's journey, unlike let's say me or Jena, who have, as we have shared in the previous episodes, sort of found our way through the marketing and advertising landscape by changing our firms like every couple of years. Unlike that, Nikhil is someone who has post IMT, post his B school, I think, been in only two firms, if I'm not wrong. You started your journey
Mm-hmm.
in Bacardi, right? And where you spent, I think, roughly about a couple of years, right? So your stint
Two
lasted two,
years.
3 years. Yeah, yeah, and then since then he has been with this one brand, which like I think gets quoted in every other marketing class, so to say, Nike, and in fact, which he's proudly wearing as well, as you can see. In fact, I doubted if he won't wear some merch from the brand, and obviously
हाँ
he is.
occupational hazard यहाँ पे भी है.
Occupational hazard. Yeah, beaches. Yeah, yeah. So we'll talk about all of that. But more importantly, Nikhil, just to tell you, in here in the show, what we try to do is sort of unravel the journey and of the person that we talk to and just have a conversation around it. So jumping right in. So let's say we met last at IMT. What happened after that? If you want to take me through. So post IMT, what happened?
What happened post IMT? Post IMT, campus recruitment happened, which
Hmm.
was again of all the jobs that I could have hoped for back in the day. Bacardi was definitely on top of the list. You know, growing up as a kid, like of course you want to work for an alcohol brand, but it was great. It was 2 years of working for Bacardi, and I think I was really fortunate enough to be in Bacardi at a time where I was surrounded by a lot of great marketing minds. So
Hmm.
I had a great learning experience those 2 years. Some of the I think Abibi, it's
Hmm.
still like one of the most benchmark sort of works that came out at that point in time, like NH7 Weekend, the team that built that property and conceptualized that property. I got to work on that in the second and the third editions of the property. Uh, Duris, if you remember,
Yeah.
were fusion of artists.
Hmm.
Um, then I got to work on like a couple of properties within like David Guetta, who was one of the biggest DJs at the time. Like bring him on
Correct.
and like do a 3 city concert series with him. So it was amazing. And like I said, it was that perfect. I still am like good friends with a lot of people that I worked with back in the day.
Hmm.
And straight out of B school, you often like read about those things in theory, but like jumping straight into it, it was really great. And doing things firsthand, like I still try to contrast my experience in Bacardi with Nike. Like it was almost like, you have this pool of money, you have these
Hmm.
plans, go ahead and
Hmm.
do it. There was,
Hmm.
for better or for worse, there was
Hmm.
like, a lot of freedom to try and
Yeah.
experiment things, which you don't
Hmm.
get in a company. I mean, yes, you do, but like not in a lot of like bigger, more established setups like Nike. You don't get like that,
Yeah.
complete freedom. In fact, I have to tell you one thing. In fact, my
Hmm.
journey into marketing was a little interesting because immediately after I joined Bacardi, even though I
Hmm.
joined in a brand manager role, they wanted me to do like a small stint in sales.
I was going to ask
Just
that.
like
Sorry to cut in. Yeah,
yeah,
but did that happen like they do in FMCG, like to give you a traditional sales stint before absorbing you in the brand function?
yeah, they did. But it was very different because normally FMCG hires you as a management trainee.
Yeah,
And then they pick and choose where you go from there, right? In
yeah,
my case, and I told you why I like the role that I got straight out of campus because
mm,
it was Bacardi, but also what I forgot to mention was that it was an assistant brand manager role. So it
correct.
was like I knew where I was going to be placed eventually. The funny thing is, I did the sales stint, which again might sound cool in retrospect, but it was really rainy, but was in Goa. So I spent like 3.5, 4 months trying to do like a sales stint in Goa, which was amazing and also like not unlike any Goa stint that you think of. But at the end of it, I was actually really conflicted if I really wanted to join marketing or if I wanted to stay in sales. And I remember having this company offsite where the marketing head at that time, he was like, "Oh, I've been hearing rumors that like people have told me that you want to stick in sales for some like for some reason." And I'm like, yeah, I really like what I'm doing. And and sales, for what it's worth, like I did a few months of it. I really liked it and I was really good at it.
Yeah.
Like, you get to connect with people on a
Yeah.
very, very personal level inside the team. You get to set goals and it was good. Like I still, like, if I ever get an opportunity in the future, like I see
Probably you
that.
shall.
I don't want to, yeah, I don't want to rule that out at all. And the thrill that you get from like making a sale and like adding to like, oh, I did this, right? There's a different level of like excitement that comes with it. So
Question,
anyways,
just Nikhil, just
yeah,
one question here. Yeah, just hold on to your thought. I remember
yeah,
you also did your summers, which was also a sell stint with Britannia, if I'm not wrong, right?
100%. That was
Yeah.
like
So was
hardcore.
that connected? Yeah. So was that connect? And I thought it was in Bihar, if I remember.
Yeah.
So any connection to what you did with Bacardi, and did that have a implication on why you were thinking like this at this juncture? Please, back to you.
Mm, maybe, but it's interesting that you brought that up, and it was like all the memories are flooding back now. It was so crazy because we did this exchange program
Hmm.
in university, and I was fortunate enough to go to Korea for 3 months.
Hmm.
And then immediately after Korea, like I barely got home, and then and my summer internship started. And from Korea to
Yeah.
go to like, and it wasn't just like Bihar has like a lot of dimensions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not going to say Bihar, but like I was like sent to like the interior parts of
Proper,
it
proper
also.
heartland. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I was
Yeah.
riding pillion on like with my
Stop.
sales rep, and like, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, with like a gamcha on my face to
Yeah.
save me from the dust. And so it was like a hardcore like transition
Hmm.
from the exchange student life. So it was like extra sensory overload in a different way. But
Hmm.
but yeah, again, like that was a very different, because I didn't have a lot of authority or autonomy as a summer intern, but you
Hmm.
do get to experience the brand from a completely different vantage point. I think in Goa, the good part was that I was given a lot of like, okay, like, here's this team, like build a plan. And like, so
You do
it was
your.
really,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
So I was thinking like, if in that capacity I was able to make such an impact, like what if I
Hmm.
continue down this path?
Right.
Well, अभी
Right.
भी है थोड़ा एक है करेंगे इस पे, like I
Right.
have to act on it at some point in time.
Right.
So that happened, and then going back to the story, the marketing head at that time, he's like, "Hey, are you sure?
Hmm.
Because like we respect your decision either ways, but just know that it's always easy for you to make a transition right now into brand. But if you choose to stick in sales, you might
Hmm.
not be able to, like, you can't decide when.
Yeah.
Then it has
Yeah.
to come back to like when there's an opportunity, then, right? So
Correct.
again, it was a weird decision, but I made it. And at that
Hmm.
point it was like, hey, that's the role I signed up for.
Hmm.
And even though I like sales, like I know I love marketing, so let's go back and give it a shot. So
Right.
no
Right.
regrets, no regrets.
No
It was a
regrets.
great
Yeah.
decision. Like I said, I still am friends with a lot of people I worked with
Yep.
at that time in Bacardi.
Hmm.
Some of my best sort of friends, and some of the best, I would say, again, going back to like marketing learnings that I got
Yeah.
were
You got
from
from
that
that.
squad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I still recall a lot of different things that like I'm still grateful for
Awesome. Nick,
from that squad.
one question. I think just a sort of a first principle check, right? So we like to give to our viewers some sort of experience based lessons back, right, and not really give a lesson per se. That there is this certain belief that in FMCG, or let's say in connected categories, you need to be very close to the on ground reality, essentially how the product is getting sold, for you to
Yeah.
do a great job at marketing as well, right? So what would you say with regards to that, basis your experience of starting your career from sales and then obviously being in marketing since then? So what would your view be on that?
I could not agree more. And I think depending on what opportunities you get, even on the Nike side, I would say, we
Yeah,
used to often talk about like how important it is to spend some time on the sales floor of a
yeah,
store, even for like a short amount of time. And I know we did this more as like an offsite or something like that. But I think that FMCG model is really, really great to get
yeah,
people to understand how consumers interact with your product real time on the ground, like what are the challenges, difficulties, what do they like firsthand. I think
yeah,
having that experience just adds a lot of dimension to how you think of marketing also, because I know for a fact, like I know the difference between people who have experienced that and when they think of marketing versus people who've not experienced that, and when they think of
yeah,
marketing, it's just a very different, more practical approach versus
yeah.
say sometimes a little bit more theoretical approach. So I would say if you get a chance as a marketer, there's no better learning than to actually see how consumers eventually interact with your product at the point of purchase or point of sale.
In Nike, I think you have done almost 4 5 roles in your stay with the company so far, right? So just how
Yeah.
have those roles changed? Yeah, if you can just touch upon that. Yeah,
Uh, Again, really grateful, like you said, to be able to get an opportunity. At that time, I was doing well with Bacardi, but like you
yeah.
said, Nike is one of those like hallowed names in
Hmm, hmm,
marketing. So when the opportunity came, I didn't even know what role they had open. I was like, okay, sign me up, which was funny because when they were introducing me
hmm,
at the company, they were like, okay, he signed up to do XYZ.
hmm.
And somebody asked me, hey, I'm really interested in what the future of XYZ is going to be. And they're like, what do you like? What plans do you have? I said, I don't even know what XYZ means. Like, I'm, I'm going to find out. But, and you were definitely one of the people in IMT who knew like
Yeah,
the crowd that was so obsessed with sport in one
yeah,
form or the other, whether it's like our EPL rivalries
yeah,
between, United
yeah,
and
yeah.
Liverpool, or like Chuck Review, and like just how people are obsessed with sport. So outside of just being a great marketing name, like to be able to work for a brand where I get to talk about sport and think about sport in my work time, like
Hmm,
that's a blessing. So when the opportunity came, I was like, okay, sign me up. No,
hmm.
no questions asked. Uh, but in hindsight, it's been a really, really gratifying journey because
Yeah,
up to it's been almost 11 years.
yeah,
And बूढ़े हो गए हम लोग. It's feels
yeah.
odd to say that, but
Let
in
me just say,
11 years.
I have a kid who is 10-year-old now. So in case they
Uh,
just if you didn't feel old enough, let me just share that as well. Anyway,
Yeah, but that's a good milestone for you to have that in mind also. So it's exactly when I would have started at Nike around that time.
yeah,
But the good news is I've been able to look at this organization, which is again, I think we'll talk a little bit more about it,
yep,
but
yep.
is so fascinating from like different angles and different
Hmm.
vantage points. And I got to work in Nike India back in the day, which was one of the smaller territories. Your objectives, your intentionality of like marketing is
And
very
just part
different.
cutting in, Nikhil, but it wasn't a market leader then, if I'm not wrong, right? So it was, I think, chasing, right, but leadership, or was it already a
It's
market leader?
still it's still not a market
It's
leader,
still not a market leader. Yeah.
but
Hmm.
that's not, and again, like my stats might be a little misleading, but that was
That's okay.
also never our intention.
Got it.
I think
Okay.
the thing about Nike always is that we will not just chase the top line. Like it'll always have to be like backed by sustainable growth
Yeah.
and
Yep.
like a bottom line that makes sense for the company. So I think even at that point in time, that was never like a
That's you
like a
got it. So
priority.
that's awesome because it's very similar to, let's say, what a Google product manager chases. They don't have like revenue targets. They have targets which is like on the user front, on the usability, and those are the KPIs. So as a similar parallel, just again, just for the benefit of the viewers, just drawing a parallel between similar brands. But yeah, back to
Yeah.
you. Okay. Yep. Yep.
No, absolutely. And so the intent at that time was very different.
Hmm.
As you know, India was, it's still like
Yeah.
one of the lowest percentage sport participation countries in the world, like compared to like how many people we have versus how many people who actually engage in active sport. That
Yeah.
was one of the lowest percentages that you'll ever find in the world.
Right.
Uh, and that's why I think the challenge is much bigger, because in my capacity as a marketing manager or a marketing whatever for
Yeah. Yeah.
Nike,
Hmm.
not only do I need to get people excited about the idea of sport and playing sport, but
Hmm.
also being able to part with a significant amount of money back in the day to spend on a Nike product, and why you want to justify something like that. So it's
Hmm.
always a two-step challenge. But I do believe that before you get them to fall in love with sport, you
Yeah.
can't get them to buy a Nike product. So it's still like the responsible, like Nike would spend, like I said,
Yeah.
Nike would spend most of our resources rather than trying to like grow inorganic share. We would
Hmm.
still focus our resources because we still feel like that responsibility almost
Hmm.
as a brand to
Yeah.
get people to play more sport. Like even if it eventually shows up in terms of revenue results 2 years, 3 years down the line, but like that's
Yeah.
us. We will never move away from that DNA. So
Yep.
that said, that was 4 years. So 4 years did Nike India, different stints, different categories. Again, really fortunate
Hmm.
enough to work in a really small team, so you get to do different things.
Correct.
Then got to move to Singapore for a year. They did some reorg internally, and the teams changed, shifted. So the org structure shifted. Got
What
to
was this role about? The Singapore role? What was it about?
So Singapore role was a brand planning role, which was
Okay.
also really interesting because I got to look at like 6 markets and work directly with the marketing director in Singapore
Got
and
it.
make plans around, okay, what categories do we focus on in which markets? What's the allocation of budgets? What's the seasonal prioritization that we do? So it was good.
Got it.
I think it was a very different role because
So
in India I
just
was
for the
more.
yeah, just summarizing that. So you're saying the first 4 years was more like a one market deployment sort of a role, right, to grow the brand and also just increase the penetration and etc. And the second one is little more of a strategic role, spanning
Yeah.
across 6 markets, like you said. Okay, awesome,
Yeah,
cool. Then yeah.
definitely more strategic, like you
Hmm.
said. And Nike India was in a great place at that time. I think even some of the marketing that we did, you would remember like the Dara Bing campaign.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. This was around
uh,
2016. Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
yeah, and
Hmm.
some of the work that still lives on, which is like it gives me a lot of pride also from my time in India, is some of the early seeds that we sowed for like the running movement. So you
Yeah,
still see like a lot of like the running community that was
yeah.
non-existent back in the day. Now they're like run clubs, and I still
It
like
just
have
keeps getting
strong.
stronger and stronger. Absolutely, you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so those were like I would say like I take more pride in like
that.
those things when I look back, even like because Nike it gives you the opportunity to not just like focus hardcore on
Hmm.
sport, but also lifestyle, right? So now if you look at the sneaker culture in India, that's
Yeah,
also like crazy to think that when we first kind of again were planting the seeds,
yeah.
um, those things were so hard to get people to get excited about. And now, like,
Correct.
slowly that momentum
Yeah,
has built. But, like, our focus was always to build the foundation and to do it right.
yeah.
And I'm glad that, now it's like become this full blown movement. But
Yeah.
I still have strong connections with people from my time back, whether it was running, whether it was like sneakers, like I still have all of those people connected. And I think if you were to take like one thing that I've learned from my time
Hmm.
in my professional journey is to invest in human relations, in people, not just inside your organization, but like
But
outside your
beyond.
organization
Yeah.
also. And the work will take care of itself if you invest time, effort, genuine care in taking care of people. So yeah.
Yeah. This is beautiful, Nikhil, and I'm just having so many follow-up questions to that. And like one question I want to ask you, a little more tactical. Like I think
Hmm.
your stint in the India market sort of coincided with the e-commerce boom as well, right?
Mhm.
So, and also obviously the proliferation of digital as well. So any key anecdotes or learnings or some observations that you had from those days, which have sort of stayed true as a sort of a first principle with you even now, right? Maybe you
Yeah.
do not have that local market responsibility, but some of these
Yeah.
channel truths sort of still are agnostic, market agnostic, right? So anything that's
Yeah.
still with you?
Yeah, 100%. I think our whole generation, Alekya, has been so fortunate to go through such an incredible sort of technological like
Yeah,
cycle, if you
yeah,
may. And we've
yeah,
seen like consumer behavior like go from one extreme to the other. And at
hmm,
that time, like you timed it perfectly because I remember the day when I first joined, like digital was like barely e-com
yeah,
was starting up, right? At that time. Uh, Main emphasis back in the day used to be metrics like Facebook following, right? How many
yeah, yeah,
followers does your
yeah,
brand have on like your Facebook page? And how
yeah,
we've evolved from that. It's so interesting to see. But I
hmm,
think at that time also, Nike India was starting to sow the seeds of what a potential e-commerce like .com could look like.
hmm,
But you have
hmm,
to realize, I think a lot of those investments in sort of capabilities around e-commerce and capabilities as such were still tough because India
yeah,
was a small market. And then the one thing about Nike is as big as it is and as globally spread out as it is, it
hmm,
still tries to maintain as much consistency in all of its
correct,
like tech and operations and even like how you look and feel the
yeah,
look and feel of the brand in any market
hmm,
versus like if you go to North America, it won't look the same but it'll look similar, like you'll be able to,
yeah,
so that consistency is really important. So
yeah,
that's why I think some of these rollouts take a little bit more time because like they want to do it the right way. uh,
hmm,
but at that time also like we were still like figuring out like even like basics like is cash on delivery going to be a deal breaker or not, or like
yeah,
some of the rules around like international credit cards. So I know we had our whole like learning curve at the time. I think it was great, and I think now looking at how Nike spread out, like we have to look at almost like ecosystem strategies where we've got like in the US or in
hmm,
some of our most of our big markets, we've got almost Mm, three commerce only touch points. So we've got
oh,
.com, we've got the Nike app, and we've got the sneakers app.
correct,
We've got two activity apps, which is NRC and NTC, so Nike Run Club and Nike Training Club.
yeah,
Uh, so at all points, you've got like almost five own channels that you have to program and figure out like cross-functional journeys, cross-platform journeys of how they kind of tally up. So yeah, long-winded way of saying like
hmm,
it's come a long way from
yeah,
where your point of sale and your point of distribution was just like a physical retail store to now where it's constantly evolving. Now there's like sound bites of hey, physical retail is back in a big way.
yeah, yeah,
And at least from a global perspective, you can tell me more about like the India
yeah.
reality right now.
No,
But
pretty
yeah,
similar. Pretty similar, Nikhil. And just a question, and I think you answered it perfectly. But again, sort of a follow-up thought. Is it fair to say that the physical stores are a little more of a branding opportunity and not just retail hence today? Is that a truth across all markets?
I think so. I think like
Hmm.
you would appreciate this, but I think
Yeah.
right now, given how insanely crazy the
Hmm.
digital consumption patterns are,
Yeah.
media is so scattered.
Hmm.
Attention span is lower than ever. In fact,
Yeah.
like most of my YouTube shorts are now like it's not even one thing. It's like a split screen of like that's how crazy
Yeah.
like it
Yeah. Yeah.
like that's
Correct.
what you have to do. There's a person speaking, but there's like a roller coaster
Some
video on the
roller coaster.
second half.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
how much like sensory overload is too much, right? So I think the physical stores still give you the opportunity to get that attention. And then what you do with that is something
yeah,
that really will define, I think, how the perception of the brand is. So I think even more so than retail, the selling aspect of physical stores, the
uh-huh,
experiential aspect of retail stores is becoming more and more critical, because that's probably the only time that you
yeah,
have with
yeah,
consumers where they're not
yeah,
like on 5 devices at the same time and you have
yeah,
their attention. It's about like what you do with that attention in a retail store. That's why I think the thought of like moving to more of a relationship or like an experiential versus just transactional focus in a retail environment is becoming critical. But it's hard because again
yeah,
that comes at a risk of your traditional metrics of like ROI and like
yeah.
productivity from a space perspective, and you have to reconcile like what's more important in the moment.
I've
So I
had
don't know.
across brands like, let's say, Apple or Amazon, like they are in fact, I think, getting more and more of the revenue share from unlocking a different version of shifting from retail to media, right? So they are in
Yeah.
fact selling more of media inventory, right? So do you also keep a tab on that as well as a retail player? And I mean, on this move, on this evolution, so to say, what the Amazons and Apples are seeing in themselves. Like I was reading some data, I think 40% of Apple's overall revenues, or 30%, or was it Amazon actually, was actually coming from their
Mm.
media arm. And that was a shocking stat for me. But is it also happening? And essentially convergence of retail and media?
No, doesn't apply to us as much as it would to somebody like an Amazon, because we obviously are vertical retailers for most parts, and we don't have any like inventory for
Yeah.
other players. But I I can't help but say that yes, we from somebody who is in the position of buying media and like applying
Hmm.
in spaces, like you got to be constantly aware of like where consumers are spending their time and money, more
Yeah.
importantly. But it's such a interesting time in media right now. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
landscape is evolving almost every minute,
Hmm.
and you have to be nimble enough. It's hard to kind of hold one thing close to your heart and be like, that's how I'm going to spend. Like
Hmm.
from like finding new spots, and a big part, I know we'll come to it, but like a big part
Yeah.
of what I do right now is finding new spaces for the brand to stay connected with the consumers. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's not an ad at all. It's like a piece
Oh
of
yeah.
integration
Yeah.
that you see with a gaming partner,
Yes.
that shows up in an unexpected way. So it's like it's a very complicated question to like how do you
Yeah.
get people's attention, especially like those young Gen Z kids. It's
Yeah.
a yeah, it's a mystery.
Dude, so I think Gen Z is still easy. I'm telling you, the Gen Alpha, and I have one in my house right now. They are
Exactly.
crazy, bro. And I mean, I like sneakers. The website, I didn't know. I got to learn from my son, right? 3 years back. My brother-in-law, by the way, is a Jordan. जो भी sneakerhead क्या बोलते हो? Sneakerhead
Mm,
Jordan. He has, I think, 20 Jordans, like, and his, I think, half of his salary goes behind that, and he has been collecting for the last 4 5 years. Before this became a sort of a movement, it is a movement in India right now, and it's
yeah,
crazy
yeah.
what has happened in last 2 3 years. Now, now I want to segue into the second part, and how I planned this was the first half we'll talk about brands, marketing, and the second half will be all around sports and culture and content, right? So which is
Let's
somewhere
do
I
it.
think, yeah, all of it can come together. So yes, so cutting to, I think you didn't. I like the fact that you didn't talk about your current role. Why don't you tell the viewers what you do right now, and then I'll have some follow up questions on that.
Okay, so last I talked about was my time in Singapore when I did brand planning.
Yeah.
And it's funny when people ask, like, even I now I get the question sometimes, like, what do you want to do next?
Hmm.
And hopefully, like, you resonate with this, right? We never had the option. I was like, I
Yeah.
grew up in India. Like, I didn't have an option. I was told, like, become an
Yeah.
engineer and you get like this,
Yeah.
stable job. And
Yeah.
then this was the one role that I got out of campus placements. Like, if it was somebody else, I would have taken that role also. So it's
Yeah.
like you never had the option. You always like find the best out of every situation. So
Hmm.
when there was an opportunity in Portland, which is where I am right now, so world
Right.
headquarters of Nike, there was a role with Jordan Brand that opened up.
Hmm.
And unlike what people want to say right now, like I grew up in in Delhi, which is still like it's Delhi, so you still get exposure. But like my neighborhood, I didn't know anything about Jordan. Like I didn't grow up. Basketball was always supposed to be an elitist. I don't know if
Yeah.
that stereotype still holds, but like in our school, like all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
rich kids used to play basketball, and like I was like, who's like whatever the exposure was not as much. So when the role opened up, it was all about the take making the most of the opportunity, and you got to work smarter and harder than everyone else around for people like me to be able to get into a place of contention, right? So there was a lot of but it was a brand marketing role for Jordan
Yeah.
Brand, focused on a geography which was Asia Pacific, Latin America. So the way that Nike structured is
Okay.
there's territories, there's geographies, and there's global. So I did my
Okay.
territory stint in Nike India and also in Singapore. And
Got it.
then in Portland, the role was a geography role, so Asia Pacific, Latin America. So
Yeah.
we've got 4 geographies: Greater China, North America, Asia Pacific, Latin
Mm.
America, and Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Okay.
So obviously, Asia Pacific, Latin America doesn't have a head. Like, where would you
Mm.
place the headquarters? So we sit in Portland.
Mm.
So again, got the opportunity, incredible learning experience for the first
Mm.
time to move out of like that Southeast Asia space and
Yeah.
look at markets like Korea, Japan, Mexico,
Mm.
and being in a position to build the foundation for Jordan Brand, just like
Mm.
India, like a lot of like people did not grow up, so the familiarity of the brand
Yeah.
was not
Yeah.
as much. So did that for almost 3 years,
Okay.
2.5, 3 years, and then got the opportunity to move into global Jordan,
Mm.
which is what I do right now. So it's been
Mm.
almost 3 years working in global Jordan.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, I'm learning every day. I did not know anything about streetwear, sneakers.
Mm.
I couldn't tell a Jordan 1 from a Jordan 2 or a Jordan 3 now. Like, I have to walk into a room and have considerable amount of authority about like
Mm.
history of sneakers and so it's all about like the second thing I would leave you with probably
Mm.
is always have like a learning mindset going into any. I
Yeah.
don't think the learning ever stops. So I still ask questions every single day. I
Mm-hmm.
learn from my teammates who might be good at something. One
Mm.
person who's played college basketball, he knows everything about basketball. Every time I have a question, like as much as I can learn from watching YouTube videos, but I go to
Yeah.
him to
Yeah.
answer questions. Other people who work with like sneaker stores back in like their time in New York and cities like that, and I always have a question around streetwear and sneaker culture. I go to them. So I think the second thing is the learning should never stop, and that's part of
Yeah.
what gives me the most amount of thrill is going out of my comfort zone where I have to like start from scratch and like learn and
Mm.
then bring in my
Mm.
perspective and my way of looking at things and add add some newness and challenge the status quo a little bit. So uh, to end your question, like my current role, what I do right now is technically it's called the Director of Strategy, Innovation, and Membership, which
Okay.
has 2 or 3 different things. So, just future forward strategy for Consumer Direct, Jordan,
Okay.
which
Mm.
is Consumer Direct is all the platforms that we engage with directly
Mm.
with the consumer. So, channel strategies, if you may,
Mm. Yeah.
uh, across all the apps.com, social media,
Mm.
like I mentioned, uh, new capabilities, new
Mm.
areas of innovation. So
Which
gaming,
can be pop culture. Oh yeah, exactly. Gaming. Please go on. Yeah. Mm.
Web3,
Three.
virtual goods,
Mm-hmm.
all of those spaces,
Okay.
new tech, AR, VR,
Mm-hmm.
AI is still a little like
Mm.
little unknown in terms of the impact internally right now, but that.
Yeah.
And then lastly is membership. So life
Okay.
cycle growth, uh, loyalty marketing, if you may. So that's
Yeah.
that's what I do right now. It's a
Awesome.
mishmash of like different responsibilities, but
Mm.
just trying to push the brand in new spaces.
Yes, and I love the last word because that was my next question. I remember my, one of those many short-term projects that we used to do back on campus. Uh,
Mm.
if you remember Hingle, Anirudh Hingle, Anshita, and I, we
Yep.
did this one, all alcohol short-term project with Red Diffusion, the advertising agency,
Mm.
and the exact topic, Nikhil, was find out different spaces for where the consumer is going to be, right? And trust me, 2 months went by, three of us couldn't even understand what the project was about. What did they mean by spaces, right? Was it physical, was it tangible?
Yep.
Cut to now, both of us are talking tonight and this morning, actually, your time. And he was saying, this is what you do. And then let's say there is a lot of first years listening to us in
Yep.
IMT or otherwise, right? So how would you explain, what do you mean by spaces, which today defines your JD, right? So how big it is for you. I want you to explain that. I
Where
don't want
consumer.
them to be one more Alekia Hingle or Anchita listening to this. Yeah.
No, I shout out to Anirudh and Anshita. It's been, all the names and faces are coming back to me. But if your question is about like just spaces where,
Mm.
from a media perspective, it's so hard right now. Like, yeah, like a part of what I do right now is, like I said, like new areas of connecting with consumers.
Yeah.
Uh, gaming is interesting because I've
Mm-hmm.
been one of the uh, growing up in India, you used to have those like arcades.
Video. Yeah. Yeah.
Those like I don't even know if that's a
Those
Delhi
was
thing or
one
not,
one
but
one button thing
yeah,
with those
but
arcades.
like a
Yeah.
grocery store in the front, and then in the
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
they'll have like
Correct.
two or three arcade like, and
Yeah.
then mom used to send you out for
Mhm.
just some daily whatever like shopping list, and then
Yeah.
3 hours later you're like, oh, I couldn't find it. Like, of course you were like in the arcade, like just spending way too much time. But that, or the like that was the early memories, right? But like
Right. Right.
again, fast forward to now, and I still feel like a big part of what I've been trying to do in Jordan for the last 3 years is trying to explore opportunities for Jordan within gaming spaces. It's just a different landscape now. So we have more of a ink level partnership with players like Fortnite, NBA
Mm-hmm.
2K,
Yeah.
uh, and a few others, EA Sports. But then all you like work with the partners, explore opportunities which feel more intrinsic, where you can show up with the brand in an authentic way, do some of your product athlete
Yeah.
catalyst, as we call them, like some of our influencers, like storytelling integration.
Okay.
Uh, so it's really fascinating, and I still feel like gaming as a space is so big, and also evolving at a constant pace, and the way the brands show up in some of those spaces is
Yeah.
also unexplored. I know I didn't answer your question directly, but there isn't a good answer. So
No, but
if
so
you had
gaming as
that
a
puzzle
space.
look,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I'm cool. I'm saying that at least this is a specific answer, Nikhil, to what you're giving, and there are other spaces apart from gaming as well, right?
that's where I was going. So if
Yeah.
you had a puzzle look after your few days with the rediffusion short-term project, like I mean, it's still like a constantly puzzle look that I have when I'm thinking of these, because the consumption is evolving every single day. From like, even when you look at gaming, there's so much
Hmm.
dimension now to what's engaging and attracting people. Uh,
Yep.
Gaming, for example, started off, the scale of the industry really took on when platforms like Twitch came on, Twitch or YouTube. So content
Yeah.
streaming for gaming is actually bigger than some of the gaming titles itself. Like people
Yes.
don't know, but people spend more time consuming gaming content on Twitch and YouTube
Absolutely.
than
Yeah.
all your HBO, Netflix, Hulu. Uh,
The
I don't know
networks.
if
Yeah.
like the yeah combined, and I
Hmm.
think that's how big even content
Like
consumption
I
from
don't know
mainstream is.
about the Indian gaming growth. How much do you know about it? So a couple of episodes back, I was talking to this person Hari, who heads content for Publicis Group here in India. He was mentioning some stunning facts about the gaming ecosystem in India. Apparently, some of the best gaming influencers are actually women, and women who are
Yeah.
housewives in Northeast. Like they are like gaming influencers, and then India is apparently sending a full e-games contingent to the Asian Games next month. I was thinking, what's happening? And apparently, there are streams to talk about the music. only to follow the music which is used in games. So it's a complete ecosystem, and which is unraveling
It's
growth in ways that we don't know. Like, yeah.
Yeah, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Like even now you hear sound bites like streamers are being paid more money
Hmm.
than NBA. I don't know if you read that, but
No
like
way.
a
No,
couple of
I don't know this.
streamers,
No.
yeah. So a couple of streamers were just offered like I think $40 million a year contract to like, and not even for exclusivity. I think it's one of the rivals of Twitch that offered them, which was like it blows your mind to say that, oh,
Hmm.
21-year-old kid who's just like streaming content, and now they've become their own brands and celebrities. I don't know if you've heard of like globally there's like, and I'm sure like India has examples as well, but
Hmm.
there's so many examples of Twitch streamers who are
Yeah.
now bigger names than anyone that you can
Some of the
think of.
players.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, so
Yeah.
it's a very, very interesting time. And then even social media, I would say, like
Hmm.
platforms like TikTok have blown
Hmm.
up so much in the
Hmm.
US. And I think it's important for brands to figure out, I think, one, you have to be authentic in how you
Yeah.
show up in a platform. You can't make something and then
Hmm.
try to like force fit into, because a lot of brands like try to like make a piece of content, but then
Yeah.
try to force fit into like different platforms. No,
Exactly.
you got to
Yeah.
make platform right content. Like how a content is consumed on TikTok is very different from IG. Even IG is very different from a feed to a story to,
Correct.
so
You can't
it's
just add up to one creative and then hope to win. It won't happen.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you got to be really intentional in the platforms that you feel are priority and where you have to win. And even
Right.
within those platforms, like you have to respect the nuance. So an IG short versus an in-feed versus a
Yeah.
story needs a
Yeah.
very different level of production, editing, and you got to be able to
Mhm.
be nimble enough to do that. I think brands are still evolving and trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see how rapidly that space is evolving.
Love it, because I mean, you have, without even me asking you the question, you have touched upon something which Jena and I have been trying to put a finger on over the last few episodes. How does the three spaces of content, culture, and commerce come together in today's day and age? I think you sort of answered it beautifully within the gaming ecosystem and beyond. Loved it. Just one question connected to that. So, how do you stay ahead of knowing the next trend, right? So, and I wish it was very easy to answer this, right? So, but like gaming obviously has exploded, so how do you go about it? Like, do you go deeper in gaming as a space, or are you always on the hunt or something like this? I'll give you an example of a brand which is trying to crack this in a very different way, which is Coke. And in a
Mm,
market like India and Asia, it's trying to really unravel, let's say, different editions of Coke Studio as an IP. So it started as,
yeah.
obviously, it did brilliantly in Pakistan, and then they took it to India, within Bangladesh, Tamil, etc. Right? So that's an IP, for example, how the brand is trying to immerse it in the culture, right? So how do you go about finding the next space or the next thing, or do you go deep into one particular culture? I wanted to know your views on that.
Again, some of this would be different if you'd asked me this question when I was working in India versus now if I'm in
Okay.
Portland. The
Hmm.
good news is I don't have to, because we
Hmm.
have like dedicated teams and people who are
Yeah.
responsible for mining insights and predicting trends
Hmm.
that, it's so critical right now to be
Hmm.
ahead of the curve and to be ahead of like where the consumers are headed next. So
Yeah.
the simplest answer that I can give you is, I think, yes, we have teams that are dedicated to working with the right thought leaders and agencies, and there are agencies dedicated to just doing that, just like
Yeah.
predicting and selling trend information. So we've got teams that compile them and then present it to the relevant teams. But I think the important thing is, what do you do with those trends? And sitting in your capacity as in my case, if it's like a strategy lead or an innovation lead, like what spaces make more sense. The challenge oftentimes is there's so much that you can do in this fragmented landscape. There's so much that you
Hmm.
can do, and it's easy to kind of get lost and spread
Yeah.
yourself too thin.
Yeah.
But I always believe, without like, I know I'm not being like too specific because some of it, like, I don't know how much I can review, but what I can tell
Hmm.
you is at a
Hmm.
broad based level, I think the Coke example is a good one. You take something that you truly believe that resonates with the consumers as a concept, as a thought, and
Hmm.
then you find ways to, because the trends and the platforms are essentially a reflection of like how and where you consume.
Yeah.
But the what is still something that like has to be true to like what you want to show up as a brand. Like you don't want to be completely swept by the trends and
Yeah.
show up in a way that doesn't feel inauthentic. So even though XYZ is trending, is it right for me as a
Right.
brand to like partake in or not? So I think having the Coke example is a good one because that's the same philosophy that we believe in. Uh, and one thing I would say about Nike as a brand is hopefully that's the perception outside as well. Uh, we spend more time in saying no to things and ideas rather than saying yes to ideas because it's more about preserving and protecting the perception and of the brand rather than taking like the small wins.
I
So
loved it. I loved your
yeah,
answer there because it took me back to the couple of years I spent on Dove, and I think that's the sign of an iconic brand which knows very well what not to do. Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
true.
I think that's so difficult to define, but because of those hard rigor that has been put in on the brand, those guardrails are put beautifully for the ones who are currently the custodians. Right. So
True.
that really helps. I'm so glad you mentioned that, and I hope people know and pick this bit up as a lesson because there will always be 10 different execution ideas staring at
Yeah,
your face as ideas which agencies will be pitching with a lot of energy, and it's so easy to just hit the button on execution,
exactly.
right? But it isn't, right? So I loved it. So just one connected question to that. So let's say like I am currently at the helm of the one brand which is new, right? So Unstop, which is sort of still figuring out its journey to drive awareness. And in here, I think because of the focus on, let's say, growth or bottom funnel marketing, often the top funnel brand awareness sort of takes a back seat, right? And the inherent impatience in a system like this and the category that I belong to doesn't quite give the breathing space. But I just
True.
cut to what you mentioned, even on the fact that you did in Nike, you in India as a market. What you just mentioned a couple of minutes back, that it took time for
Yeah,
Nike to sort of bring in the change, right? So
yeah.
even for an iconic brand like this, if it sort of takes a time, what's your view on that? Like a brands do get they do need the time, right, to build what they
Yeah.
want to build, right? So what's your view on that?
So there's two dimensions to what you asked, and I don't know if it exactly answers your question, but I also believe that this is such an interesting time with like technology capabilities where you can be more personal at scale than ever
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
I can get a personalized notification on my phone telling me exactly the product that I was browsing last week that's now back in stock, right? So just
Yes.
being really surgical and being personal is also, but I think the challenge now with brands is to be able to manage like the balance between like a scream from the top versus like
Hmm.
a soft whisper in your ear. And you have to
Nice.
be able to balance both. So, to your point, the soft whisper is what we normally call as like our 365 communication, which is more driven towards like driving consumers to the right
Mm.
product or the right piece of experience
Yeah.
or content on our platforms potentially. And then your
Mm.
traditional marketing, I still feel there is room for that, like your traditional big brand
Hmm. Yeah.
campaigns to like create disruption and like, oh, get people to, think of you in a different way. You got to be able to balance both. And you can put more of an ROI pressure on like the 365 piece of
Quite
it.
big. Yeah.
Uh, but then you got to think big, bold, disruptive on which will, bear fruit months down the line potentially.
Correct.
But both are
Correct.
important is
Beautiful.
is is what I believe in. And uh, the second thing that came to mind when you said that was, I think it's such an evolving spectrum of like how we balance that right now.
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
brands are still trying to figure it out in terms of like what's more important and what's more critical.
Yeah.
But I do believe, irrespective of how you do it, uh,
Hmm.
you really have to be true to solving some sort of a consumer need, whether with the big or the small piece of
Yeah.
communication that you're doing.
The three things that I personally am introspecting a lot over the last couple of years, and I try to inculcate them in my team members as well. That essentially, if you see as a manager, broadly, you do three things, right? So you want to manage your business slash organization that you are in. Second, you want to manage the team that you are in charge of, and you want to manage yourself, right? So I want to talk about the second and the third bits, starting with the team, and I want to go back to something that you mentioned a few minutes back. How at the end of the day you have figured out that human relations, whether
Yeah.
directly in the organization or beyond, is what actually is the distilled only truth probably that matters to you, Rao. So if you can touch upon that and your view on how do you manage teams and people around you, directly or the ones who have dotted line connections to you. Go for it.
Yeah, it's a great question, Alek, and I feel like the more you go up in the hierarchy, almost in a company like Nike, I think your work is your work. But what
Hmm.
separates you from everyone else in terms of how you're taken seriously for like a more leadership sort of a
Sure.
oriented role is your ability to work with teams and people. And even in Nike, like we are such a cross-functional matrix organization. Like you're oftentimes responsible for working with people who have completely different, interests and objectives. And how you bring people together is probably the most critical part of growing in a company like Nike. So I've had to learn a lot. I've had to work on those skills a lot. Uh, but you're also blessed being an Indian, like your skills to what we used to call like bakchodi.
Jugaad.
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 No, no,
Okay, that's even better.
because like you are blessed with like small talk sometimes in areas of like abhi
Yeah.
yahan pe kaise hota hai, like you always focus so much on like formal modes of communication. So if you are working with me, I'll like send you an email, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
growing up as an Indian, you always know that like, like, kya chal raha
Yeah.
hai baki
क्या
ke?
कर
So,
रहा है?
exactly. So you always build that sort of an informal mode of communication. So again, not to go into too much, but I feel like balancing
Hmm.
formal and informal goes a long way in building a human connection with someone.
Yeah.
And you don't get like we take it for granted, but you don't get to see a lot of that here in the US. Like it's always like really formal in
Yeah.
process.
One more
Or it's
one more lesson from India to the world. Yeah, that we are passing
exactly
on.
100%. Like the corridor conversations are way more impactful than like the meeting conversations. Like
Right.
you can't do your job as a manager on how you got away with doing things like 10,
Oh
15 years
yes.
ago.
Yeah. 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 This
Uh,
is so
so
true.
you
So true. Hmm.
so you have to constantly evolve in how you treat people, how you show up as a manager. I feel like I joke about it sometimes, but I was like, when we used to think of like managers back in our day, like putting
Yeah.
your legs up or टांगे ऊपर
Yeah.
करके बैठ जाओ. Exactly. I wish that was the case, but उल्टा हो गया अभी. Now I feel
Yeah.
like the managers are
The
not
load is on us. Yeah.
even,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
but I do like the challenge sometimes, the fact that like you got to I think now more than ever, you got
Yeah.
to be there for your team in a genuine way. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
like controversy and critique there, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes people also have this perception of like when you say stuff like, "Oh, your work family,"
Yeah. No.
like at the end of the day, like you got to balance like how far you push that spectrum also,
Yeah. Yeah.
because companies are still
Hmm.
corporate
Yeah.
entities,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
you don't want people to like manipulate the idea of like family by asking you, oh, शाम को 8 बजे कुछ like ये जल्दी करते like one
That
family,
never
right?
happens in a
So
family. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So like you got to balance like both aspects, but it's such a fascinating time. I feel like even as a manager, the one thing that I believe truly and back from my Bacardi days that I learned early on
Hmm.
is just treating people with the same amount of respect, no matter where they are,
Yes.
whether they're your boss, whether they're your peers, whether they're your subordinates, whether they're agency partners. Like respect them for what they do, and then
Hmm.
eventually that will always come back. Like in the long run, that'll always pay off. Like if you treat them with a certain amount of like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I like that part. I still practice it as much. So as a manager also, like I don't want to curb the thinking that my team has. Like I
Hmm.
always give them the opportunity to be bold and fearless and express what they truly wanted to say. But at the
Huh.
same time, as a manager, wherever I can help support them, I'm always there for them. And it comes with that trust, uh, respect again on how you kind of put them in a path to success. But like I'm not out there on the field with them. Like I'm always cheering them from the sidelines. Like all the drills that
Awesome.
we did go before the
Yeah.
game,
Yeah.
that's my role. Now you're on
That's
your
it.
own. When the lights are shining, like I want them to shine on you because like your success is my success. If you do well on the court, like
Yeah.
I get a pat on the back from my boss saying that okay, that's like you helped do that. So
Question, but
yeah,
I'm tempted to ask one follow up to what you just mentioned.
yeah, of course.
Yeah. So with your team, and because you mentioned कि हम बूढ़े हो गए, I think this is a legit next question that बच्चे जो बच्चे हमारे team
Yeah,
में हैं,
yeah,
what about those team members? Because my thing, Nick, is that I'm learning a lot from the youth in my team. I mean, they teach me
yep,
so much. I mean, in terms of the energy that they bring in, the different set of sensibilities than what we were when we
yep.
started off as professionals. And I think and that helps me become a better manager every day at work in understanding them and wanting to understand them. And what's your view on that? How has it been? And I want you to just touch upon the multicultural experience, because you are seeing that, which is something that someone like me is not exposed to. So I want to know that. Go for it.
Now the funny thing is, I don't think the boundaries are as rigid as they used to be. So
Hmm.
with like everyone consuming the same content, following the same
Yeah.
people, I feel like
Yeah.
culturally also, obviously there will be differences, and I don't want to kind of,
Hmm.
but it was for me, it was a big challenge also to be in a
Right.
position where I'm managing, different national, mostly Americans, like in my role right now, but like it was a different challenge because like your
Hmm.
sensibilities
Yeah.
are very different. Like your expectations, like I said, like,
Hmm.
with being a manager are very different. So you have to constantly evolve. And I feel like I'm saying the same thing, but like you can never be satisfied both in terms of work, but also your personal side. You got to your
Hmm.
point, like constantly be able to learn what the new generation is bringing in terms of thoughts and ideas. And I'm
Hmm.
always impressed with like their drive, their hunger,
Hmm.
their exposure to different trends,
Hmm.
their ability to, you know, take chances. I think is
Hmm.
very refreshing and very different. I think there
Hmm.
is like pros and cons to like our generational conditioning versus the generation that you're seeing right now. And it's
Yeah.
important that I, as a manager, can pass on the good from my
Hmm.
generation, but
Hmm.
protect them from the bad from my generation. And then
True.
at the
Yeah.
same time,
Yeah.
like take the good from their generation, but try to course correct some of the
Builds it
things
out.
that come
Hmm.
in from, yeah, so which you want to kind of point out in the right moment. So I feel like it's a constant sort of a value exchange, and your job as a manager is probably at best to like be the filter of
Yeah.
what comes in and goes out in that sense.
On to my last question, and this is about
Yes.
you, right? So I remember from, okay, if I just close my eyes and think of my memories of you from campus, it was this, and I think that word came up in the last 1 hour. It was this very, very respectful junior on campus, and I think who was a beautiful balance of both extracurriculars and academics. I think you topped your batch, right? If I'm not wrong, right? You were a gold medalist.
I was up there,
Up
but
there. Okay,
not
okay.
but not
Top
really.
percentile. Yeah,
Yeah.
but whatever. Yeah, but you were at 9 pointer, I remember. 9 pointer-ish. And second, I think you were always there on the ground, right? So
Yeah.
with your Liverpool shirt, if I remember correctly, and one of those active participants in Czechoslovakia, and at the same time in Alcom, we were having all that,
Yeah.
extracurricular fun that we were having in that very serious office of ours, right? The Alcom office. So yeah. So cut to now. So how much has that love for sports inspired and played a part in who you have become today? How much has that individual changed over the years as you have evolved over the years? So how have you managed yourself, and how much has this love for sports come together with the role that you're performing now, and also your love for marketing, which you always wanted to from campus,
Yeah.
and barring that small hiatus where you were tempted to join sales? Yeah. So how has Nikhil evolved over the years? Go for it.
Nothing has changed. Like, yeah, I'm still the same. Everything that you described, I still get described the same way, even from my peers in my like assessment when we do like year-end assessment. It's the same thing. I feel like being kind and respectful is at the core of like how I want to show up in a professional and like in an otherwise setting. So that's still true to me. And to your point of the love of sport, like I still I'm still as obsessed as I ever was. Now I'm just blessed to be working for a company where I get to talk about sport for a living. It's just different sport. So going back to
Different.
the idea of being agile and evolving all the time, like ever
Yeah.
since I moved to Jordan Brand, I had to learn from scratch about the sport of basketball.
Hmm.
And I'm fortunate because I feel like I was missing out. But from like college basketball to like NBA, to like global basketball, FIBA and stuff, it's amazing. Like the sport is incredible, and I can't like I still have to pinch myself that I get to do that, and it's incredible. Like I still spend a majority of my time now. Like more sports have added. So if earlier I was waking up to watch like Liverpool games on a Saturday, I have college basketball on Saturday. Then I have NBA games. Sorry, college football. Now I also watch American football. So I have NFL. The season just kicks off today. So as soon as I wrap up here, like the first season opener is this. So it's like
Okay.
it's about like embracing, and I feel like that's a great way of connecting with a new country and a new culture is
Yeah.
by embracing their sport for one.
Mm.
But yeah, I still do all the things. I feel guilty that I don't get to watch as much cricket because the timing and the broadcast partners are always different, and I have to be on the lookout for like how do I stream the next thing. But sport has taught me so much and has
Mm.
given me so much, and I'm sure you would also agree with that mindset is if you love sport, like it always shows up
Oh yes.
in every aspect of your life. You take
That's a.
those
By
life
the way,
lessons.
Nikhil, sorry to cut you, but one of my
Yeah,
interview questions is which sport do you play? Right. So that's something
yeah.
that I ask, and even if it's like something that they stopped playing 10 years back, their answer reveals a lot about the person that is sitting on the other side of the table to me. Yeah. Yeah. Please. Back to you.
100%. And like going back to like a silly example of like when you show up in IMT in your first year and you build a team of like football with your
Yeah.
players, right?
Yeah.
You don't know what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are, but sometimes you
Yeah.
just have the mindset to like, okay, where do you want me? Or like
Mm.
I'll slot in and I'll do what is needed of me. I feel like it's the same constant sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
application that I find helpful even in work. Like you put me in a team, like I'll find what's needed and where the gap is, and I'll start to slowly but surely like position myself in where the gap is. You don't want to like
Mm.
if there's a great midfielder in the team, you
Yeah.
don't want to like, oh, I also want to be like, you can do
Good.
that, but like
Yeah.
that's where like a true galvanized team needs people who can fit into multiple roles. That's why
Correct.
every role that I've taken on in IT has been completely different from my previous role, only
Good.
because there was a need in that
Mm.
space and they were like, hey, can you figure it out? And it goes back to the same, like you got to treat people with respect. If you know that you want them
Mm.
to deliver on that collective goal,
Yeah.
that you have set out, like you got to be able to give them the same sort of freedom and respect to be able to do that thing. So yeah, life lessons from sport, like that could be a whole other 1 hour
Oh yeah.
discussion
We'll
on
we'll
that
we'll
part.
get to that.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so but yeah, I still
That's
do
the
that.
sense. That's the sense I was getting. Maybe there is one more episode somewhere in here that we need to get to.
Oh
But loved it. So I mean, some of the keywords. I think if I'm to summarize, kindness, respect, and I think you didn't use the word, but what I've sensed all through this recording that learnability has been a constant for you always.
yeah,
It was on campus
absolutely.
as it has been, and that's a great skill to have today as things are changing so fast. I mean, there is no end to learning, right? So every day we are learning. We need to learn and personally as a person, if you remember, I was always a big quizzer, so that
Yeah,
helped me sort of learn by default because of that kira that I had, and always that has
yep.
a good rub off on my day job, and great to hear you as well how you have maintained that streak. Lovely. Let's say there is someone, a young Nikhil somewhere in campus, IMT or otherwise, right, somewhere, who wants to follow and embark on the same journey, right, for you. Any hacks, like they want to call it, any hacks that you have for them
It's
to
the toughest question, Alika. I don't know what hacks, but I would say keep working hard and don't necessarily give up on on what you really want to do and find like what gives you joy and work hard and work smart towards finding that place that gives you joy. If you can combine, it won't happen all the time, but if you can combine what gives you joy with something that can pay off your your rent. I think that's the perfect balance that you want to kind of achieve at the end of the day. And I think now with the space that is so democratized with technology, with exposure to media, uh, everyone's seeing and absorbing the same things. It's about your hunger and your appetite. Like, where do you want to kind of focus your time, effort, and energy on, and how do you want to channel those learnings into building like a career for yourself? So I would say it's a very different landscape when you and I were there, where we had to lean on like campus placements. It's like the only way to get into an industry or do an MBA to get into an industry. I see so many successful stories of people like just doing completely random things and being amazing at it. So there's no one blueprint to success anymore, but it's important to find, I think, what gives you joy and how do you apply that and work. Shout out to East India Marketing Company. When you first told me about this podcast, I couldn't think of anyone better than you and Jaina to be hosting this podcast, because I feel like you guys have been, especially in all my interactions with you, I feel like you've been one of the most inquisitive sort of marketing minds back from our time also. So I can't think of anyone better to have spend this 1 hour talking random marketing related things with. Hopefully it was helpful. But yeah, subscribe, like, share the East India Marketing Company podcast for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick, and hopefully some Jordans on the way to our viewers, as and when we have a contest. Just kidding.
Giveaway, yeah, let's do
As a
it.
giveaway. Thank you, Nikhil. So thank you so much to our viewers for listening, and I hope you liked what we had here. And just like in Shoe Dog, Phil Knight had mentioned that keep running and just do it. So hopefully you like the episode.
Awesome.